You've moved on, or at least that's what you tell yourself. The relationship ended. Maybe weeks ago, maybe months, maybe even years. You've deleted the photos, stopped texting, unfollowed or muted him. But somehow, he's still in your head, still showing up in your thoughts when you least expect it, still popping up in memories, in dreams, in the quiet moments when you're alone and you're wondering, why am I not over this? Here's the truth. When someone lingers in your mind long after they'd left your life, it's not just because of how much they meant to you, it's because they're tied to something deeper, an emotion, a hope, a part of yourself you haven't fully reclaimed yet. Today we're going to talk about the real reasons he's still in your head, not from a place of judgment, but from a place of awareness. Because once you understand the emotional mechanics behind why you're holding on, you can finally begin to let go, not just of him, but of the hold he has over your thoughts, your heart, and your future. Let's break it down. When someone stays in your head, it's easy to assume it's because of how deeply you cared for them. You might think, I can't stop thinking about him because I loved him so much, or there must still be something there. Otherwise, why would he still cross my mind this often? But the truth is, more often than not, you're not holding on to the person. You're holding on to what he represented, the version of life you imagined with him, the future you were building in your head, the version of you that felt seen, loved, and chosen. When a connection ends, especially one that felt intense or full of potential, your mind doesn't just let go of the person, it struggles to release the story you created together. Or if we're being honest, the story you created about him with the pieces he gave you. That story was emotionally vivid. It gave you excitement, hope, even identity. And now, even if the person is no longer there, that story is still playing in the background. You find yourself revisiting old moments, not because they were always great, but because they were meaningful, because they made you feel something you haven't felt since. This is why missing someone isn't always about who they were. It's about what they symbolized. Maybe he made you feel wanted after a season of loneliness. Maybe he came into your life at a moment when you needed to feel chosen. Maybe he reflected back a part of you that you liked seeing, more confident, more alive, more desirable. So when it ended, it wasn't just a breakup. It was a rupture to your emotional identity. You didn't just lose him, you lost what you felt when you were with him. That's what makes detaching so difficult. It's not just about accepting the relationship is over. It's about mourning the version of yourself you were becoming in that relationship. And without him, it can feel like you're left in limbo, still reaching for the same feelings, the same connection, the same emotional high. This is why you might find yourself idealizing the good moments or downplaying the bad, because the emotional residue of what he represented still lives inside you. And your brain is looking for a way to bring that experience back to life, even if it wasn't sustainable or real. What makes this even trickier is that we don't always see it clearly. You might believe you're stuck because he was the one, or because you never connected with someone like that before. But often, when you peel it back, what you're truly craving isn't him, it's what he brought out in you. That sense of being wanted, that hope of partnership, that feeling of momentum toward a life you were excited about. Here's the empowering truth. What he represented is not lost. That version of life, that version of you, it still exists. But it was never truly about him. He may have activated it, but it came from within you. That light, that openness, that capacity for connection, it's still there. It just needs to be redirected. The more you see him as a mirror for your desires instead of the source of your happiness, the more power you take back. So if he's still in your head, ask yourself this: what was I really holding on to? Was it the man, or was it the version of myself I saw when I was with him? Because once you separate the symbol from the person, the grip he has over your mind starts to loosen, and that's when healing truly begins. Not when you forget him, but when you remember who you were without him. When someone stays in your thoughts long after the relationship has ended, it's usually because your mind is still clinging to a version of the story that feels unresolved. And often, that story isn't the full truth. It's a carefully edited version, filtered through nostalgia and selective memory. You remember the highs more vividly than the lows. You replay the times he made you laugh, the way he looked at you that one night, the words he said when everything still felt right. What you're doing, often without realizing it, is preserving a narrative that's keeping you emotionally attached. This happens because the brain is wired to seek coherence. When something ends abruptly or leaves emotional confusion behind, your mind goes into replay mode, trying to understand it. And when you don't have all the answers, or when the ending didn't bring closure, you unconsciously begin rewriting the past to make it easier to hold on to. You ignore the arguments that drained you. You dismiss the moments you felt unseen or anxious. You justify the emotional distance or broken promises. In essence, you romanticize the version of him that matched your hope, not the version of him that showed up inconsistently or left you uncertain. This is where healing gets stuck. You're not clinging to reality, you're clinging to the version of the relationship that you wanted to be true. You haven't rewritten the narrative honestly because part of you still wants to believe in what could have been. And that makes perfect sense. We're all emotionally invested in the potential we saw, not just the person. Letting go of that imagined future feels like letting go of a dream you worked hard to build. It's painful. It feels unfair. So instead, the mind tries to preserve it, even at the cost of your peace. But the cost is real. When you don't allow yourself to look at the relationship truthfully, when you keep clinging to the highlight reel, you stop yourself from fully detaching. You stay emotionally entangled with someone who might not have actually shown up for you in the way you needed. You keep the story alive, not because it's healthy, but because it still feels unfinished. The problem is, that unfinished version is keeping you emotionally stuck in a place that no longer exists. Rewriting the narrative isn't about villainizing him. It's not about turning him into a terrible person just so you can move on. It's about allowing the whole truth to exist, the good moments and the ones that hurt, the things you loved about him and the ways he fell short. Because only when you see the full picture can your heart begin to release its grip. Only then can your mind stop replaying a fantasy that was never fully aligned with reality. Think of it this way. When you watch a movie and the ending doesn't make sense, you might rewatch earlier scenes trying to find a clue. You analyze it, overthink it, hoping something will tie it all together. That's what your brain does with relationships that didn't end cleanly. It keeps going back, trying to rewrite the script so the ending won't hurt as much. But the closure you're looking for won't come from the past. It will come from accepting the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Letting go starts with telling yourself a more honest story, not a cruel one, just a true one. A story where you can appreciate the connection for what it was without needing to pretend it was perfect. When you do that, he stops being the star of your emotional story. You stop idealizing a version of him that never fully showed up. And most importantly, you start making room for a new chapter, one written from clarity, not illusion. There's a reason why some people take up space in your mind long after they've left your life. And it's not always because you still love them. Sometimes it's because their presence triggered something deeper, something unresolved within you that existed long before they arrived. When he's still in your head, it's often not about him at all. It's about what he activated, an old pattern, a wound, or a part of your self-worth that's still searching for healing. This is why the thoughts linger, because the relationship didn't just end. It touched something inside you that hasn't fully closed. For many people, relationships, especially intense or emotionally charged ones, become mirrors. They reflect things back to us that we haven't dealt with yet. Maybe he made you feel seen in a way you'd never experienced before. Or maybe the way he withdrew mirrored a pattern of emotional abandonment that started long before him. In either case, what you're really stuck on isn't the person. It's the lesson your soul still feels it hasn't learned. The lack of closure isn't just about how things ended with him. It's about something that was reawakened in you that now feels incomplete. That's why it feels like unfinished business, not because you still need to talk to him or go back, but because you haven't yet uncovered what the relationship was trying to teach you. This is where many people get confused. They think their inability to move on means they should still be together. But in truth, what's unresolved is not the relationship. It's the emotion that was triggered. Maybe it's your need for validation. Maybe it's a fear of not being enough. Maybe it's a pattern of chasing love from emotionally unavailable people. Whatever it is, that's the part that's truly haunting you, not him. We all have emotional blueprints, Patterns shaped by past experiences, often from childhood, that influence who we're drawn to and how we attach. When someone fits that pattern, even if it's unhealthy, it can feel familiar, and we confuse that familiarity with chemistry. So when the relationship ends, it doesn't just feel like a breakup. It feels like losing a key to some part of your identity. Your brain keeps bringing him up, not because you're supposed to be with him, but because your system is still trying to resolve the deeper emotional imprint he stirred up. This is why healing isn't about him texting you back or offering closure. It's about you finally turning inward and asking, what did I need from this relationship that I didn't give myself? What belief about myself did this experience reinforce or challenge? What is this pain pointing me toward? When you start to see the situation through that lens, you begin to reclaim your power, because now, instead of waiting for him to free you, you start doing the inner work that will. Some people are catalysts. They enter your life not to stay, but to stir something, to wake up a part of you that needed attention. The pain you feel might be uncomfortable, but it's also an invitation to look at the wound underneath, to ask what's really been left unhealed, and to stop projecting the responsibility for that healing onto someone who was never meant to carry it. So if he's still in your head, ask yourself, what am I actually trying to resolve? What unfinished lesson is my mind still chasing? Because the moment you shift from, why can't I stop thinking about him, to what is this teaching me about me, that's the moment he starts to lose his power over your thoughts. Not because you forgot him, but because you finally remembered yourself. When a relationship ends without proper closure, your mind doesn't just let it go, it clings. It replays moments, revisits conversations, and rewinds the last scene again and again, like a movie that cut to black without warning. It's not always about the person. It's about your mind's need to make sense of what didn't make sense. Human beings crave resolution. When something emotionally intense ends without explanation, the brain interprets it as unfinished business. So even if you know logically the relationship is over, emotionally you're still stuck trying to solve a puzzle that doesn't have all the pieces. That's the frustrating part. When someone leaves without clarity, or when the breakup feels sudden, or when you never got to say what you needed to say, your mind stays in loop mode. You keep going back because it feels incomplete. And this doesn't necessarily mean you want them back. Sometimes you just want an answer. You want to understand how someone who seemed to care about you could disappear. You want to know why it fell apart when you thought things were finally moving forward. That emotional lack of resolution becomes the hook that keeps him showing up in your head. Closure, contrary to what many believe, isn't always about a final conversation or mutual understanding. In reality, the person who hurt you is often the least equipped to give you the closure you're craving. Either they don't have the emotional maturity, or they don't see things the way you do, or they're simply unwilling to revisit the situation. And that can leave you feeling powerless because they walked away and left you holding all the emotional weight. It's like being left in a conversation while the other person just stood up and walked out. What's worse is that the longer you wait for closure from them, the longer you stay emotionally stuck. You begin postponing your own healing in hopes that one more message, one more call, one more chance encounter will give you what you need to finally move on. But the truth is, the more power you give to the idea that they hold your peace, the less power you have to create it yourself. And that's what keeps the thoughts of them alive. Not love, not compatibility, but a deep desire to close a chapter that still feels open. What no one tells you is that closure doesn't have to come from them. In fact, the most liberating kind of closure is the one you give yourself. It's when you stop waiting for the other person to acknowledge your worth or admit they hurt you, and instead you validate your own experience. It's when you stop asking, why did they leave like that? And start asking, why am I still waiting for someone who already showed me they couldn't stay? When you give yourself that shift from seeking answers externally to creating resolution internally, everything changes. You stop needing them to say sorry. You stop needing them to explain, because deep down you already know enough. You know how you felt. You know what you gave. You know where things stopped aligning. And that's enough to begin writing your own ending. So if he's still in your head, And if part of you is still searching for something to make it all make sense, remind yourself that peace doesn't come from knowing why it ended. It comes from accepting that it did, that you loved, that you learned, and that you can move forward without needing one more word from someone who already left the conversation. The closure isn't a moment, it's a decision, one you get to make, even if they never gave you one. When someone leaves your life, and you find yourself still thinking about them constantly, replaying memories, wondering what went wrong, it's easy to believe you're just struggling to get over love. But sometimes what's really happening is deeper than that. Sometimes what keeps him in your head isn't the love you felt. It's the belief that his attention, his affection, or his approval made you valuable. When a man makes you feel seen, wanted, and chosen, and then disappears, the part of you that linked your worth to his validation doesn't just let go, it panics. It searches for that sense of value again because it wasn't fully coming from within you to begin with. We all want to feel special, it's human, and when someone comes along and gives us that feeling, especially in moments when we needed it most, it's incredibly powerful. He might have made you feel like you were finally enough, finally beautiful, interesting, exciting, wanted. So when he leaves, it can feel like those things are taken with him. Not because you weren't those things before, but because you believed them more when you saw them reflected in his eyes. It's like you outsourced your sense of self to someone who couldn't hold it. That's the part that hurts the most, even if we don't say it out loud. It's not just the loss of the relationship, it's the loss of the version of ourselves we felt when we were with him. The confident, radiant, chosen version. And now, without him, it feels like a part of you is missing. So you think about him, not because he was perfect or even right for you, but because when he looked at you a certain way or said certain things, you liked the way you felt about yourself. This is where emotional entanglement gets complicated, because instead of just grieving a connection, you're unconsciously trying to reclaim a feeling you haven't learned to generate on your own. You keep going back in your mind, not because the relationship was ideal, but because he once gave you something you didn't know how to give yourself. Emotional validation. That's a hard truth to face, but it's also a liberating one. Because once you realize that what you're missing isn't really him, it means you can start to get it back without him. You start by rebuilding your internal sense of worth. You remind yourself that you were valuable before he showed up, and you're valuable now that he's gone. You were beautiful, interesting, enough, all of it, before he ever said it out loud. His attention didn't create your worth, it just temporarily highlighted it. And just because he stopped seeing it doesn't mean it stopped existing. It just means you've been looking for confirmation from the wrong source. When you begin to reclaim that power, things shift. You stop wondering if you weren't good enough. You stop fantasizing about what it would feel like to have him back. You stop replaying every interaction, searching for what you could have done differently to keep his interest. And instead, you start asking more important questions like, why did I need him to tell me who I am? Or how can I start believing in my own worth again, even without anyone else reflecting it back to me? Because real healing doesn't come from being chosen by someone else. It comes from choosing yourself over and over again, especially when it's hard, especially when the silence feels loud, especially when the memories feel sweet. That's how you get him out of your head, not by convincing yourself he didn't matter, but by realizing you don't need his validation to prove you matter now. When someone used to occupy a big emotional space in your life, their absence doesn't just disappear quietly, it leaves a void, a mental and emotional gap that used to be filled with their presence, their texts, your routines together, the daily thoughts about how they felt or what they were doing. That space didn't just hold the relationship, it held part of your identity, your habits, your hopes. And when the person is gone, that emotional space doesn't automatically close up. It just sits there, unfilled. And because nature hates a vacuum, your mind tries to fill it with thoughts of them. This is why he keeps showing up in your head, even if you logically know the relationship wasn't right. It's not just about missing him, it's about the fact that your emotional world hasn't fully been reorganized without him yet. The space he used to take up is still wide open, and you haven't fully replaced it with new things, new connections, or a stronger version of yourself. So your brain reaches for the most familiar thing to put back in that empty spot. Memories of him, fantasies of what could have been, even arguments you never got to finish. The more routine that connection was, the more ingrained it became in your daily rhythm. You used to think about him on your commute, during quiet moments, maybe even before bed. There were messages to respond to, calls to expect, energy being exchanged. All of that activity became part of your mental landscape. So when it's suddenly gone, your thoughts don't know where else to go. They default back to what they know. That's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of emotional conditioning. Your nervous system is still wired to expect the presence that no longer exists. And this is where many people get stuck. They think, if I'm still thinking about him this much, I must still be in love with him. But often what's actually happening is a form of mental muscle memory. You're used to spending emotional energy on him, so now your mind keeps doing what it's always done, even if he's no longer worthy of that energy. And unless you consciously choose to replace that space with something else, something better, healthier, more connected to your future, you will keep reliving the past, not because it's what you want, but because it's what your brain is used to. Replacing that space doesn't happen by accident. It's an intentional process. It means building new habits, investing in new connections, finding new sources of fulfillment that aren't tied to him. It means giving your energy to people, places, and passions that reflect who you are becoming, not who you were when you were with him. And sometimes it even means redefining how you relate to yourself, asking, who am I when I'm not thinking about him? And what kind of life do I want to build that has no space for that old story anymore? This is the real work of moving on. Not erasing the past, but reclaiming the space it once occupied. The more you fill your life with meaning and direction, the less room there is for someone who no longer fits. And over time, the thoughts of him won't feel so heavy. They'll come less often. They'll sting less. Not because you forced them out, but because you finally filled the space with something, someone, even more important. You. The version of you that's whole, focused, and no longer relying on old memories to feel alive. If he's still in your head, it doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean you're broken. It means there's still a part of the story you haven't fully healed, understood, or rewritten. But now you know what lingers isn't always love. Sometimes it's an old pattern, an unspoken goodbye, a version of yourself that felt more alive when he was around. And the most powerful thing you can do now isn't to get him back. It's to take back the emotional space he's still occupying, not by fighting your thoughts, but by replacing what no longer serves you. You don't need his closure to heal. You don't need his attention to feel worthy. And you don't need his memory to define your next chapter. You are not waiting for him anymore. You're remembering who you are without him. And from that place, you get to decide what deserves space in your heart, your mind, and your future. That's when the real healing begins. Not when he's gone from your head, but when you've come back home to yourself.